My name is Lillian Monroe. I am 86 years old. People in town know me as the quiet woman with the tidy little garden and the grandchildren who visit every Sunday. They see me smile, hear me hum old songs as I water the roses, and think that I am content, untouched by bitterness. They do not see the war I have carried inside me for 70 years. It was an ordinary afternoon when the question came. My grandchildren were sprawled across the living room, the television flickering in the background, the scent of cookies fresh from the oven hanging in the air. My oldest granddaughter, Emily, had been watching some program where a couple declared their undying love. She turned to me suddenly, her eyes curious and innocent, and asked, "Grandma, why don't you trust men? You always say you never needed one after Grandpa died." Why? The question froze me. My knitting needles slipped from my hands, clattering against the wooden floor. The room grew still, their small faces turned toward me, wide-eyed, waiting. How could I tell them? How could I shatter the innocence of that moment with the truth that had haunted me for 8 decades? But something in me, the part that had stayed silent for too long, snapped open. The years of secrecy, of shame not my own, of memories buried in the attic of my mind. They pressed forward, demanding release. I looked at their faces, my blood, my legacy, and thought, if I don't tell them, the silence wins. And silence is what allowed him to hurt me. I folded my trembling hands in my lap and began. "It was your great-uncle," I said softly, my voice so low I almost didn't hear it myself. The room shifted. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "My brother. The one I never speak of. He was the reason I never trusted men." The children glanced at one another, confusion flickering across their faces. "What do you mean, Grandma?" little Sarah asked, her voice hesitant. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry, my chest tight. "He hurt me," I whispered. "When I was just a girl. He broke something inside me that I could never put back together." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop. For years I had imagined this moment, the shock, the disbelief. But I hadn't expected the stillness, the way their eyes softened, the way they leaned in as if they already knew on some instinctive level that I was telling them something terrible, something true. And for the first time in my life, I did not flinch away from the memory. I did not bury it under forced smiles or whispered prayers. I let it rise, sharp and brutal, because they deserved to know why their grandmother had never been able to lean on a man without suspicion gnawing at her heart. "My grandchildren," I said, my voice steadier now. "You asked why I never trusted men. It is because the very first man I ever trusted, my own brother, betrayed me in a way so cruel, so unforgivable, that I have carried it all my life." Their faces blurred through my tears, but I pressed on, because this was only the beginning. "You need to know what happened," I said, my voice low and fierce. "And you need to know how, after years of silence, I made him pay." Hang on, before I tell you what happened next, make sure you've subscribed and left your thoughts in the comments. This part gets intense. Before the pain, there was innocence. I grew up in a small clapboard house on the edge of a farming town. The air smelled of soil and wood smoke, and nights were filled with the sound of crickets and the low hum of trains passing in the distance. My brother Daniel was 2 years older than me. To the outside world, and for a long time even to me, he was the golden boy. He was tall for his age, with a quick smile and a way of charming neighbors with a polite, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir." Teachers praised him for his sharp mind. Our mother used to run her hands through his hair and say, "My Daniel will go far." And me. I was the quiet one. The girl with her nose in books, who helped in the kitchen and tried to keep the peace when tempers flared. Our father was a stern man, worn down by years of hard labor. He drank more than he should, and when his voice rose, the house seemed to shrink. In those moments, I looked to Daniel for comfort. He was my shield, or so I thought. When father slammed doors or shouted, Daniel would squeeze my hand under the table. "Don't worry, Lil," he'd whisper. "I'll protect you." I believed him. We spent summers chasing fireflies in the field, winters huddled under quilts listening to the radio. He was my first friend, my companion when the world outside our little house seemed too big. When I scraped my knee, he was the one who carried me back home. When I struggled with my sums, he sat beside me, patient, guiding my pencil across the page. There were times I thought no sister could be luckier. But small shadows had already begun to creep in, ones I was too young to recognize. Daniel had a temper, one he hid well from outsiders but unleashed within our walls. A slammed fist on the table when supper wasn't to his liking. A sharp tug on my braid when I annoyed him. "You're such a baby," he'd sneer when I cried. Once, when I broke a glass, he whispered in my ear, "You'll never be anything but a burden, Lil. If I didn't watch out for you, no one would." I brushed it off, chalked it up to sibling cruelty. Children can be unkind, I told myself. But even then, those words rooted deep. And sometimes, I noticed the way his gaze lingered too long. Not with the warmth of a brother, but with something else. Something that made me feel small, uneasy. I didn't have words for it then, but my body knew. I remember clutching my nightdress tighter when he walked past, or slipping out of the room when his silence grew heavy. Mother never noticed. Or maybe she chose not to. She was too busy smoothing Father's moods, keeping the house together with trembling hands and tired eyes. So I stayed silent. Because who would I tell? Who would believe a timid girl over her golden brother? Looking back now, I see the pattern. The way he chipped at me, eroding my trust while tightening his hold. He made me believe I needed him, that without him I was nothing. It was grooming in its most insidious form. But at the time, I only knew this. He was my brother. The one person who was supposed to keep me safe. And that was why the betrayal, when it came, cut so deep it carved a wound that never healed. I paused, looking at my grandchildren's wide eyes as I told them this part. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. "Do you understand?" I asked softly. I trusted him. I loved him. He was my brother. That's what made what he did next the kind of betrayal you don't come back from. The room fell silent, the weight of what I hadn't yet said pressing down like a storm about to break. Before we move on, take a second to hit subscribe and drop a comment. I'd love to hear what you think so far. I was 14 years old the night everything I believed about family, about safety, about love was ripped away. The memory lives in me as clearly as if it happened yesterday. Some wounds do not blur with time. They sharpen. It was late summer. The air was thick and hot, cicadas buzzing outside the screen door. Mother had gone to help a neighbor who'd fallen ill, and Father was passed out in his chair, the sharp smell of whiskey hanging over him like a cloud. That left me and Daniel alone. I remember the stillness of the house. The way shadows stretched long across the floor. I was in my room, reading by the dim glow of a lamp, when Daniel came in. First it seemed ordinary. He leaned against the doorframe, smiling that easy smile of his. "What are you reading, Lil?" he asked. I held up the book, a collection of poems. He stepped closer, too close, and sat on the edge of my bed. "You're growing up," he said softly. His eyes sweeping over me in a way that made my stomach twist. "Not a little girl anymore." I laughed nervously, clutching the book to my chest. "Don't be silly." But his hand reached out, brushing my hair from my face. His touch was wrong, not brotherly, not safe. My body tensed. "Daniel," I whispered, "don't." But he didn't stop. "The details. I will not burden you with all of them." My grandchildren sat frozen as I told this, their small hands curled into fists, their eyes wide with horror. I spared them the specifics, but I gave them enough to understand. That night my brother, the boy who once promised to protect me, the boy I had trusted above all others, became my first betrayer. He stole something I could never get back. When it was over, he pressed a finger to his lips and whispered, "Don't tell. No one will believe you. You'll ruin the family. You need me, Lil. Without me, you're nothing." And then he walked out, leaving me curled on the bed, my body shaking, my heart shattered. I wanted to tell Mother, to scream, to beg for help. But when I opened my mouth, the words died. Daniel's voice echoed in my head. No one will believe you. You'll ruin everything. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He teased me over breakfast, smiled at Mother, fetched Father's coffee. To the world he was still golden. And me became a shadow, quiet, withdrawn. My laughter faded. My trust withered. I carried the weight of a secret I had never asked to hold. For months, I avoided him as best I could, retreating to corners, inventing excuses. But he always found ways to remind me. A smirk across the table, a squeeze of my shoulder that lingered too long, a whispered, "Remember, Lil, you need me." The lowest moment came one evening at church. We sat together in the pew, the preacher's voice droning about purity and family. Daniel bowed his head piously, hands folded, the perfect son. A neighbor leaned over to Mother and whispered, "You must be so proud of him. Such a fine young man." Mother beamed. And I sat there, my throat burning, my hands trembling in my lap. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to stand up and shout, "He is not fine. He is not good. He is a monster." But the words never came. Instead I stayed silent. 'Cause I was 14. 'Cause I was afraid. Because I believed deep down that maybe he was right. No one would believe me. That night, alone in my room, I wept until my chest ached, until my pillow was soaked through. I thought about ending it all, about slipping away quietly so the pain would stop. But something held me back. A stubborn spark inside that whispered, "Not yet. Survive. Just survive." I looked at my grandchildren as I told them this part. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide, their lips pressed tight. And I said, my voice trembling but fierce, "He thought I would stay silent forever." And for a long time I did. But silence is not the same as surrender. One day, I found a way to make him pay. Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? For years, silence was my prison. Daniel's words, "No one will believe you. You'll ruin the family. You need me," became chains that bound me tight. I walked through girlhood into womanhood with that weight pressing on my chest. I learned to smile at neighbors, to bow my head in church, to sit at family dinners with a brother who wore his charm like armor. On the outside he was golden. On the inside he had left me in ruins. But time has a way of shifting shadows. And what he thought was buried forever began to stir inside me. At 17 I left the house. I told my mother I wanted work in the next town over, that I'd found a position sewing at a factory. She was sad but proud, her hands lingering on my cheeks. Daniel smirked when I packed my bag. "Running away doesn't change anything," he whispered. But leaving did change something. Distance gave me breath. Space gave me perspective. And in that distance, I began to see him for what he truly was. Not the brother I once loved, but a predator who thrived in silence. I vowed then, if I couldn't fight him as a child, I would bide my time as a woman. One day he would face the truth. Life was not easy. I married young, though trust never came easily to me. My husband was patient, kind, but I held him at arm's length. After his sudden death, I never remarried. The children I raised were my light, but the shadow of my brother's betrayal never left. Daniel built himself a life too. He became a respected man in town, a businessman, even a deacon in the church. People admired him. They looked at me and asked why I remained alone, why I was always so guarded. I bit my tongue, but the words clawed inside me. And then one day, decades later, the opportunity came. I was in my 60s when I overheard two women at the market whispering about Daniel. Not about his charm this time, but about the rumors swirling. "Strange how he spends so much time with young girls from the youth choir," one said, her voice low. Chill ran through me. My stomach turned. Could it be that his sickness hadn't stopped with me? That day, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my trembling hands. Rage welled up, not just for me, but for every girl he might have harmed. My silence had been his shield, and I couldn't bear it anymore. That was the moment the plan began to form. I started slowly, carefully. I listened when whispers rose. I asked questions quietly, gently, to mothers and girls who seemed unsettled around him. Some shrugged it off. Others looked away, their silence too telling. I began writing everything down. Places. The notebook filled with observations that painted a picture no one could ignore. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was bigger, darker. And I knew then, when I finally spoke, I would not just tell my truth. I would strip away his mask entirely. Years passed. My rage simmered into resolve. I knew Daniel's pride, how he loved attention, how he basked in being seen as a pillar of the community. So if I were to strike, it had to be where he thought he was most secure. Public. Visible. Unavoidable. I imagined it clearly. Him standing tall at a gathering, smiling as people praised him. And me stepping forward, my voice cutting through the air, armed not just with memory but with proof. The image fueled me. It gave me strength on nights when nightmares returned, on mornings when my body ached with age. I had waited decades. What was a little longer to ensure my blow was fatal? And then one summer the chance came, a church anniversary celebration. The hall would be full, the town gathered, Daniel seated at the front as an honored guest. As I tucked my worn notebook into my bag that morning, my reflection in the mirror met my eyes. I whispered to myself, "He silenced me once. Never again." The stage was set. Before we move on, take a second to hit subscribe and drop a comment. I'd love to hear what you think so far. The church hall was glowing that evening, packed with neighbors and families dressed in their best. Tables lined the walls with potluck dishes. Children laughed near the doorway. And at the front sat my brother Daniel, beaming like a king among his subjects. 84 years old but still sharp, still smug. His hair was white now, his shoulders stooped, but his eyes carried the same glint I had known as a girl. That glint that once promised protection, then delivered betrayal. He wore his pride like a suit of armor. He thought the whole town adored him, and for a long time they had. But not tonight. When the pastor opened the floor for testimonies, words of gratitude, memories to share, I rose. The room shifted. People turned, smiling kindly. Some whispered my name. Lillian Monroe. Daniel's smile froze just slightly when he saw me step forward. He hadn't expected me. I leaned on my cane, reached the microphone, and placed a worn notebook on the podium. My voice trembled at first, but it carried, clear and steady. "My grandchildren asked me recently why I never trusted men," I began. "And I told them the truth. Tonight I will tell you too. Because silence has protected the wrong person for far too long." The room went still. I was 14 when my brother, the man you all call a pillar, a deacon, a leader, crept into my room and destroyed the trust a sister should have in her brother. He told me no one would believe me. He told me I would ruin the family. He told me I needed him. And for decades I stayed quiet. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel shifted in his seat, his smile gone, his face pale. "Lillian," he began, but I raised a hand. "Don't interrupt me, Daniel. You stole my voice once. You won't steal it again." Murmurs filled the hall. People leaned closer, eyes wide, some already shaking their heads in disbelief, others staring at him with suspicion. I opened the notebook, my hand steady now. And it wasn't just me. Over the years I listened. I wrote down what I heard. The whispers. The mothers who said their daughters felt uneasy around him. The girls who never came back to choir practice. The glances that carried fear. I flipped through pages, reading aloud dates, names, places. each word like a stone hurled against the false image he had built. The audience shifted, their whispers now sharp, accusatory. One mother in the crowd stood abruptly, her voice shaking. "My daughter said the same thing. I thought she was imagining it." Another woman's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. The weight of truth was crashing down on him, heavy and undeniable. Daniel stood, his voice trembling. "She's lying. She's always been jealous, bitter, alone." But the crowd no longer believed him. The women's voices rose, overlapping, echoing my truth. "You told my niece to keep a secret. She said you touched her shoulder too long. My girl quit choir because of you." The room erupted, not with laughter but with fury. Daniel's face drained of color. He stumbled backward, clutching the pew. His kingdom, his mask, his life's work, shattered in a single evening. I closed the notebook, my voice calm, almost cold. "For 70 years, I carried the weight of your sin. Tonight I lay it down. You told me no one would believe me. Look around, Daniel. They believe me now." The pastor's face was ashen. Neighbors glared. Parents clutched their daughters closer. The golden boy of our childhood had crumbled into ash before their eyes. And me. I felt lighter than I had in decades. By the end of the week, Daniel had resigned from every position he held. Families avoided him. Whispers followed him down every street. He lived long enough to see his name dragged through the mud. His reputation erased, his pride crushed. And me. Found peace. Not joy, not forgiveness, but peace. The silence that once suffocated me was gone, replaced by the sound of my own voice, finally heard. Weeks later I sat with my grandchildren. They were quiet, thoughtful, the innocence in their eyes tinged with the knowledge I had given them. One of them asked softly, "Grandma, do you regret telling?" I looked out the window at the roses blooming in my garden, and answered without hesitation, "No," because for 70 years, he thought silence was his victory. But my words destroyed him. And that was the justice he never saw coming. He told me no one would ever believe me. He told me silence was my only choice. But silence is not surrender. With one voice, I stripped away the mask he wore for decades and forced the world to see him as he really was. I found peace, and he found disgrace. For more stories of betrayal, revenge, and justice served cold, subscribe now, because the next one will cut even deeper.